Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. for the Maoist Third Worldist Collective. Today, I wanted to talk about the fourth world again. Primarily to this point, I have discussed the fourth world in relationship to autism, and that certainly is a valid component of the fourth world. But today I want to go beyond that to talk about the fourth world in a more general sense, and incorporate other populations that would or might be considered as being included within the fourth world. The fourth world was referred to debatably, and I admit debatably, by the Italian Marxist Antonio Gramsci. And he referred to the subaltern using the term the subaltern. Now, reason why it's debatable. Some people have argued, and not entirely without merit, because Gramsci was not entirely clear what he meant by the subaltern, that the subaltern was simply Gramsci's term for the proletariat. And one could make that argument. I choose not to. And I admit I choose not to for purely selfish reasons. I have no basis for insisting on it, and so I don't insist on it. I simply say this is how I am using the term subaltern. So regardless of whether Gramsci meant the proletariat or whether he meant the fourth world, I use the term subaltern to refer to the fourth world. There are some Maoist third worldists who refer to the fourth world or the subaltern as the lumpen proletariat or simply the lumpens. I prefer to reserve that term for the category of people, the class of people that Karl Marx referenced himself, namely workers without class consciousness. So I think that that is certainly a valid category. There are a lot of workers without class consciousness. I would argue, unfortunately, most workers, especially here in the first world, do not have class consciousness. They're workers, but they don't have class consciousness. So in that sense, they would not be considered proletarians. Marx, for example, mentioned that the proletariat should carry guns. Why? So they could engage in revolution. Well, what do we see happening in the United States? The gun culture. The gun culture is basically a lumpen proletarian culture. It is a culture dominated by people, by workers, and maybe by some subaltern people as well, who do not have class consciousness. They are sometimes disparagingly, and so I'm using this term with qualifications, referred to as trailer trash, or rednecks in some cases. I don't use those terms because I see no need to call people by names. I don't like name calling, so I don't engage in it. I only mention that for purposes of clarification. So in case you have heard the term redneck or trailer trash, you know what I'm talking about when I refer to the lumpen proletariat. That is basically what I mean. But I don't want to use the term redneck or trailer trash. So I say lumpen proletariat. Now, back to the subject. The fourth world or the subaltern. What is that? Well, we've discussed it again as including autistics. They are people who are below the proletariat. Basically, they are the underclass. They are people who basically live on a basic subsistence income, or perhaps on no income at all. Many are beggars. I see a lot of them around here where I live in the Rio Grande Valley of Texas, which is one of the poorest, if not the poorest region, although it has some competition in the United States. This certainly is a very poor area of the United States. Now, there are some wealthy areas, there are some middle class areas, but there is also a lot of poverty in the Rio Grande Valley of Texas. I see people on the street begging, selling things that really would not have much value to anybody. I assume some people buy them, which is why they sell them. I look and I like flowers, but not really bouquets of flowers, just single flowers. I don't understand why a person would buy a single flower, but maybe that's my own problem. I don't see a point of that. But that's what I see people selling, single flowers here in the Rio Grande Valley. Um, Perhaps that's all they can afford to purchase. I don't know. I'm just guessing. But a lot of people in this part of the United States who are simply dirt poor. Dirt poor. They have nothing. Now, in spite of the fact that they would certainly be considered the fourth world or the subaltern here in the US, what we call the subaltern or the fourth world here would in many other parts of the world, for example, the third world, many third world countries would be relatively well-to-do. I'm not saying that they would be wealthy, certainly not, but they would not be in quite the same position as I have seen in other parts of the world. For example, when I was in the Republic of the Congo, I would walk down the main street, which looks like a street that you would see in the Western world. The Congo used to be a part of Belgium, and it kind of looks like Belgium. It was built by Belgian architects, the entire downtown area. When you go beyond or behind those areas, that increasingly you find poorer and poorer areas, to the point where you see people living in nothing but boxes, which I've also, by the way, seen in the American South, especially in South Carolina. So I'm not saying that that is unique to the third world. It is also found to an extent right here in the United States. You see people in the Congo with bloated bellies, which is something that I personally have not seen here in the US. I'm not saying that there are no such people, but at least I have not seen them. I see a lot of fat people, including myself. I'm getting a little bit fat, but not very many people with bloated bellies, as best I can tell. And I think I can distinguish between somebody who has a big stomach like myself, a beer belly without drinking beer, and somebody with a bloated belly. And so it's very sad traveling to that part of the world, seeing that kind of poverty. Where I travel right now to Mexico, I don't see that many people who are in that level of poverty. These are basically merchants in the border areas who are selling things. I assume that there are some people in the area who are or would be considered as being a part of the subaltern or the fourth world. I can tell you a particular story of what happened when I went to Nuevo Progreso once. I went to a part of Nuevo Progreso that most tourists don't go to. I imagine it might be somewhat dangerous, but that's not something, as a native New Yorker who used to wander down 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th Avenues, which were, when I was a kid, really dangerous areas. They're not so dangerous anymore. They're basically they've been gentrified in a lot of high-rise apartments for relatively wealthy people. now populate the area. So I'm not afraid of being in a dangerous area. It just doesn't frighten me. But I would walk behind there, and I would see a lot of houses with no walls. Now, I still to this day, if one of you know, please leave a comment below this video and tell me whether any people live in those houses. I'm thinking, who would live in a house without a wall? It's not like, I mean, there are woods in the area. They could find wood and make their own wall if they wanted to. So I don't understand it. And I never saw any people as in the far exterior of Progreso, Nuevo Progreso. Just a lot of friendly barking dogs, small friendly barking dogs that I would pet when I went back there. They were very, very friendly. They ran up to me. The only person that I ran into in that area, in that relatively looked like abandoned part of Nuevo Progreso, was this man. I'm not good at guessing ages. He was definitely younger than me, but then again, almost everyone is younger than me at 67 years old, but maybe 10, 20 years younger than me. I don't know. He asked me if I had 2 quarters. Most people in the Nuevo Progreso can speak English, at least some English, and some speak fluent English. There's a guy there that I'm very friendly with who runs a leather goods store. Really, really nice store. In fact, I told him, I said, you're charging too little for this stuff. You should raise your prices. And I said it with laughing, and he laughed back. Now I know why they do it, because they're trying to attract tourists, and it works. But really, the prices on that they charge for things are much, much too low. And I'm paying in American currency. If I were paying in Mexican currency, I would pay even less. But I don't want to do that. I don't want to give them less money than what they ask for in American currency. So I pay them in American money. This guy who runs leather goods store is definitely not fourth world or subaltern. But this guy, this guy that asked me for the 2 quarters, yeah, I would say yes. I would say yes. Now, I don't know for sure, but I think there's a pretty good chance. So I reached into my pocket. It turned out I only had 1 quarter. And I said, I'm sorry, but I only have 1 quarter. So I just gave it to him and got ready to walk away. In retrospect, I felt bad because he took me off guard. I should have given him at least $20. Why not? I mean, it would mean nothing to me. Who cares? $40, $50. But for some reason, it just didn't cross my mind, because I was thinking about where I was going next, and so I just gave him the quarter. And then at that point, he opened up his hand, and there was some pot in his hand. That's what he was doing. He was trying to sell me marijuana. And I said, "Oh no, I'm sorry. I don't smoke weed. I don't use non-medicinal drugs. I only use drugs that are either prescribed to me or over-the-counter drugs that you can get at a pharmacy." So I apologized to him, and then he tried to give the quarter back to me, and I said, "Oh no, just keep the quarter." Again, that's in retrospect when I felt bad, or why I felt bad about not giving him more money than I gave him. So I would suspect that person was subaltern, would fit under what I would call the subaltern, my interpretation of Gramsci's term subaltern, the fourth world. People who are desperately poor, who might, in some cases, develop class consciousness. Might. In other words, they have the potential to do that. They may or may not, but there's nothing stopping them from developing class consciousness. Marx, on the other hand, had literally no faith that the lumpen proletariat would develop class consciousness. Was he right or wrong? I don't know. I'm not qualified to make that judgment. I would say Marx wasn't qualified either. He was giving his own opinion. But I think, to be consistent, I want to reserve the term lumpen proletariat for the specific class that Marx referred to, and use Gramsci's term, subaltern, or my own term, not really my own term, but my own parallel term, the fourth world, as an alternate designation for the subaltern. The subaltern are all over the world, and especially, but not exclusively, in third world countries. When I was in Kinshasa, I would walk down the street and see dead bodies laying in the street. I asked this person I was with the first time, I said, "Are they sleeping? Resting?" Hoping he would say yes. And he said, "No, Mark, they're dead." He said it to me in French, but he said, "No, Mark, they're dead." And I felt like crying. I did. I felt like crying. Now, did I cry? No, I didn't cry. But I certainly felt like it. It was a very distressing sight when I realized ultimately that I was walking around, literally walking around dead bodies on the street. And I said, "Well, what happens to them? Do their relatives claim them?" And he said, "Usually not. Usually not. What happens is that every day or so, these people will come by with a truck and simply load the bodies into a truck." I'm not sure whether he meant like a flatbed truck or a pickup truck, whatever. But he just said a truck, load them into a truck, and drive off. And I said, "Well, what happens to them then?" He said, "Well, they're just buried together in a common grave. They're just dumped there." I said, "They're dumped there without any identification?" He said, "Yes, that is unfortunately true." So, if you want to see the worst of the subaltern, the most oppressed of the subaltern or the fourth world, go to a place like Kinshasa, and you'll see them there. They are all over the place. Go into the areas that tourists don't go to. Don't worry about yourself. Some of them might harass you. So what? Be harassed. It is something that we all need to see for ourselves. The kind of desperation, the kind of misery that so much of the world, especially in the third world, are going through. Now, the third world is not exclusively made up of the fourth world or the subaltern. There are a lot of very wealthy people there too. In Kinshasa, they live on cliffs right overlooking the Congo River, which is a common sight in many third world countries. These huge mansions where the wealthy Congolese people live, contrasted with these poor souls living in the back alleys of Kinshasa in cardboard boxes, or little more than that. In some cases, not even that. In some cases, simply living on the streets. on the streets, just on the streets. I've walked by and I've seen people simply sleeping on the street with no mattress, with no blanket. Well, blankets aren't necessary there. I mean, it's really, really hot year round. But without a mattress, I can't even bear sleeping without air conditioning. That's how accustomed I have become to the privilege I enjoy or try to enjoy. But then I think back on these people that I've seen in Kinshasa and this guy that I saw in Nuevo Progreso, and I know what real poverty looks like. And again, I am not dismissing the fact that there is poverty in the United States, that there is a subaltern, a fourth world in the United States. I have met people like that too. I've seen them. I've spoken with them. One example, before wrapping up, are the so-called Mississippi dirt eaters. You heard that right, dirt eaters. I lived in Mississippi for 4 years. That's where I got my Ph.D. at Mississippi State University. And there are people, very poor people, and they're mostly white people, some black, but mostly white. And they supposedly, I guess, subsist, at least partially, on eating dirt. And that is obviously due to a variety of factors, but I think overwhelmingly a lack of education. Many of them literally believe that because dirt contains nourishment for plants, that dirt is food for human beings. Well, dirt may be food for plants, but it's not fit for consumption by human beings. It simply is not human food. And yet there are these Mississippi dirt eaters, these poor people. Some of them, the lucky ones, live in trailers. The lucky ones do. The others live in shacks, barely shacks. So one family living in a shipping container. That was it, a shipping container. That's where they lived. And they put a hole in the front of it so they could get in and out of it. And I actually was in there talking with them. They had no furniture. There was nothing at all in there, just dirt on the bottom. But at least they had shelter. I don't know what they ate. I didn't see any food there. But again, this fourth world, this subaltern exists here in my country, exists in the United States, but it exists especially when you travel to the third world, and there it is unimaginable. This has been Mark for Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Maoist. Third Worldist Collective. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.